Ready? Welcome to Unearthed, an Alien Earth after show brought to you by Perfect Organism, the Alien Saga podcast. I am your host, Jamie Prater, and I'm joined by my co-hosts.
Patrick Green.
And Andy Geek Girl.
And as I stated earlier, Perry is not able to join us tonight, but he will be back with us next week. But we are here to talk about Observation, Episode 4 of Alien Earth. So I'm going to hand it off to Patrick for an overview.
Let's go. So we start with Wendy waking up with her hearing off. She has it adjusted and she starts copying some Xeno sounds. Wendy confronts Joe about not visiting. She mentions that he had to go to a cemetery and thinks that might have been part of why he was upset and might not have visited. Morrow begins talking to Slightly about getting the creature back, and we learn that Morrow's first name is Kumi, which is a Ghanaian name, and Slightly tells him that his real name is Aruj Singh. Kirsch tests Slightly's loyalty. The dynamics with Kirsch are very interesting in this episode. We have the long-awaited true unveiling of the eye midge in all of its gross, adorable beauty, which enters the sheep. We have Arthur and Dame escaping the facility for a second and discussing the hybrids. Arthur expressing that he's becoming increasingly uncomfortable with some of Boy Cavalier's recklessness. Nibs tells Arthur and Dame that she thinks she's pregnant, which leads to Dame agitating Nibs back in her office and Nibs attacking her very violently. The team decides to wipe Nibs's memory to remove some trauma. Hermit becomes a Prodigy employee and he learns that he's not going to be taking Wednesday home. He leaves and meets up with Rashidi and Siberian, who we haven't seen in a few episodes, and it's because their squad is now private security for the facility. Boy Cavalier tells Wendy that Joe can stay only if she can decode what the aliens are saying. Toodles tells Kirsch he wants to be called Isaac, and he catches Slightly trying to break into the lab, who pushes back, and Morrow threatens his mother's safety, and we find out that Kirsch has been listening. The Lost Boys get a moment to unwind outside together. We learn a little bit more about the outside world through Hermit and a little bit more about the Lost Boys themselves through their interactions. We have Slightly confronting them, who's upset that Hermit is allowed to stay. And we end the episode with Wendy returning to the lab. The lung explodes and a chestburster comes out, and Wendy establishes this nascent relationship with the chestburster, who I am, and I mean this, I really want to coin this term, so help me do it, the pneumomorph. I really want us to call it the pneumomorph because it comes out of a lung, and I think that is a great opportunity to have a new term, and we're gonna say it's canon, the pneumomorph with the P. And then we end, of course, with Jane's Addiction tonight with the song Ocean Size. And there we go. Let's hand it over to Andy.
That was a great summary, Patrick.
Thank you.
Yeah. So immediate reactions. I love this part because it's just all about the vibe. And for this one, I was creeped out. Like to me, it was just a creepy vibe from beginning to end with humans, with the synths, with the creatures. There was just so much sinister emotions happening, questions again about humanity. Um, and right away, one of the themes I want to talk about later too is Boy Cavalier just constantly saying the brother, never calling him by name. And I think having a name again comes up as a major theme, identity and what it means. And, is my sister's, not Wendy. She has a name. It's just this lovely thread throughout. But I was creeped out from beginning to end. And Morrow is I want to talk about Morrow a lot today. But my immediate reaction, I really enjoyed this one. Um, it uncovered a lot, but it was like a view inside. It was like they were under surveillance to our eye. Like everything was, we were like this entity watching in, and it was really interesting to get a peek into more of their private lives. What
Yeah,
about you
I
guys?
would agree. Like, I really love this episode. This comes after, of course, what is at this point in this series my favorite episode, which is episode, wait a minute, three. Yes, I'm losing count. I thought that this was a very interior episode for sure. Interior in every sense of the word. I mean, what is behind us? What is inside of us? What is I mean, we see the image make its way into the sheep. I mean, and then just all of these discussions about like life and the creation of life, and all of these voices coming from, like, there's a voice coming from what's his name? I'll always forget his name. Who is Morrow talking to?
A
Slightly.
rouge or slightly, yeah.
Right.
Slightly, okay. The voice coming from his head, and then you see elements in this episode where you're it's Boy Cavalier looking through the eyes of another synthetic or hybrid. It's very interesting. I mean, it is the quintessential interior episode. I really loved it. I loved that it slowed down and that we didn't get any xenomorph activity. I mean, a little bit we did, but not like you didn't see the beast running around killing people. You didn't see anyone really get killed. This was a show to really, this was an episode to really slow things down and get us to really think about the themes that they're presenting to us. And I loved it. I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, I'd say this is my second favorite episode. My first favorite is one that you haven't seen yet, so stay tuned. I think this one is really, really great. And I got to go back to what Andy said about being sinister. To me, like this episode, if you had any questions about like Morrow before this, about if he was like, quote unquote, a good guy or a bad guy, you don't have any questions after this because he's, threatening Aruja's mother's livelihood, or life rather, which is really just beautifully sinister and direct. And, and I was watching it tonight with Micah. She's actually seen it with me a couple times too now. We were talking about how interesting it is that like Kumi's experience as a parent probably prepares him in some way to be better at manipulating Aruj, Morrow and slightly, because he knows kind of just what buttons to push on to know how to nudge slightly in the direction of what he wants. The difference, of course, being that what he's doing is like pretty much evil, but in terms of there's a fluency with how Morrow speaks to slightly that I think is really kind of haunting and makes me think about what Morrow's past might have been. In terms of, I love Kirsch in this episode. For some reason we haven't been talking
Yeah.
about him at all, and I don't. Every single time we end one of these, I'm like, why are we talking about Timothy Olyphant at all? He's so good in this show, and he has a number of wonderful moments in this one. And one of them is I love in the beginning. He just has this like very typical kind of Kirschian reaction thing that he does, where he sees something that doesn't quite correlate with the data that he's expecting, and he kind of does this like little thing where he cocks his head, and it's just beautiful micro acting, and it's just that runs through this whole episode. I love how it's really hard to tell exactly what his motivations are because we are aware that he's keying in to what's going on in Slightly's head, and that he can also hear Morrow talking to him, and that he's allowing it to happen, which is really interesting, and that he's been surveilling everything. And to Jamie's point about surveillance, like we are seeing this episode largely through the eyes of people who aren't actually the agents of the action in the episode. We're seeing Aruj through Kirsch, we're seeing all the stuff through Cavalier's eyes. We're seeing the sheep through the eyes of a monster. And I love the sheep scene for a lot of reasons. Not because I don't love sheep, I do love sheep, but I just love this freaking image to death. I just think it is like it's so cool. It is like my favorite new monster in anything that I've seen in like a decade. I don't know. I just think this thing is wonderful, and I just love it, and I just love it to death, and I think it's really cool. And I love how the sheep's attitude changes once the image is inside its brain. It is like completely still, and you never see a wild animal doing that. You always see them kind of moving around or kind of going to do something, but it's just still. It's just static, and that simple thing is what Alien is all about in terms of like the things that scare us. Like when something is acting in a way that feels completely foreign, it is so frightening because it's clear that it wants something and we might not know what that is. So I love that. I love this episode. I think it's a really cool, freaky one, and I'm excited to talk about it some more. And I'll go ahead and hand it over to Jamie to take over for Perry's segment tonight. Oh no, I was going to do that actually. So I will go ahead and take over for Perry's segment tonight. And before I do, let's go ahead and read some stuff in the chat. Take a little break for a second. We have an interesting observation from Matt Thomas, who says that he notices that when Alien Earth is coming in on screen, there's a moment where it looks almost like it says Alien Faith. And that's an interesting observation. Zarnold Quigley, what's up, man? Says, what an episode. We have Julian D'Souza's back, and he's talking about Slightly's situation and about how that might be showing us things about Kirsch and lots of other cool stuff. We'll check in with the chat throughout tonight. And we're now going to go to a more in-depth plot breakdown to do some, kind of story arc analysis, talk about some characters, and I'll hand it over to whoever wants to start us off on that.
Well, one of the major things that I kind of wanted to get into again was Boy Cavalier and his complete dissociation from anything that connects us to humanity. He kept saying the boy, I know I mentioned this, but um, he just dehumanizes everybody to, make to basically validate his choices, which I think he knows are wrong. And I think he's just like, but it's all in the name of discovery. We have to move forward and it's what I want. So that's what we're gonna do. And it's my world. This, and him comparing himself to or constantly bringing up Peter Pan. I noticed when he talked about brothers and fathers, and then he had this particular disdain for mothers because they tell you what to do, right? And that's like he just does not want to be told what to do. And even if he might question something, he's like, no, I don't really want to think about those things. I don't want to think about being right or doing what's right. So I'm just going to move forward. He was particularly sinister in this one. And then when he's having that discussion with Joe about what do you think, and not him too, but oh, what's his character's name? What's the character's name? He's like he works with Boy Cavalier, and
Adam Mines.
he's yes, thank you, Adam. So when he's talking with Joe about what Wendy is and what do you think she is, and that sinister threat too of, you can leave, but you're beholden to us, you're in debt to us, and you're staying, basically. That whole discussion, he he essentially told him he wanted his feedback, but then he told him he was wrong. Like, what do you think she is? And then when he told him, when Joe said, that's my sister, he negated that. It's almost like he's toying with him. He wants him to feel that, and then because he can use that against him. So I just thought the humans in this were awful. They were just so awful, but it was so powerful to see that and then to see the cyborgs, to see Morrow and Kirsch also play with these themes of what does it mean to value somebody's humanity and also their autonomy, right? The Lost Boys are basically stripped of their autonomy. And so you have them conjuring up stories for themselves. Nibs literally making up a story for herself to self-soothe because she knows something's wrong inside. And a baby is a much better option to her, right? It's the human option to her. It's what is natural versus what she knows to be very unnatural inside. That moment was so scary with Dame. I thought the two actresses did an amazing job in that scene because I could really feel the anger in Nibs and I could feel the fear in Dame. She really sold that. So I just love the themes that they're running with. And I think this episode really sold it. Like you were saying, Jamie and Patrick, it wasn't action packed, but I was intrigued the entire time. I was like really invested. I wanted to see where they were going. So,
I can hop in. There's a couple things in the chat I do want to bring up kind of out of order that speak to what you were just talking about. And these are actually from just before you started talking about it. But Dylan Smith brought up a great question for us, which, we can kind of put out to the chat. So please answer it on your own. He mentions that Ainz tells Hermit that they're creating immortality for humanity, but in the same breath says that Wendy isn't human anymore. So what do they actually believe? Is it about, humanity being eternal, or is it about future customers being, ever at the ready? I think that is a great point. Andy, I'm really glad that you brought that up as well. And also, Zeno Nick says, Nibs is starting to fall apart emotionally, which is crazy coming from a synthetic, which also goes back to Morrow's riddle about one is a machine, not a machine. to your point, Andy. And so I just want to take a second to talk about Nibs's arc because I think that's really interesting and kind of germane to this entire story. I think she presents a lot of windows into the treatment of synthetics that we really haven't had much of an example of previous to this. And other than a little bit David, right? Because David is he's emotionally temperamental. He's very kind of human in a lot of ways. But Nibs, her humanity comes from trauma, which is something that really kind of is one of the metrics by which we sort of define being human. I mean, like part of the human experience is living with trauma and how we deal with that. And I think what is a really beautiful aspect of her character and also of Lily Newmark's performance is we see that human element of trauma starts to bubble to the surface. And then we get this other question, which is what are the elements of being human that we are allowed to express in these things? And it's clear that Prodigy decides that you can be a human in terms of your athleticism, you can be a human in terms of your intellect, but you can't be a human in terms of your trauma. That's where they draw the line. And what an interesting place is that to come down on. And
Mhm.
that reminds me of Dylan's point about like who were we really talking about? Because they're really not talking about making people. They're really talking about making repeat customers. They're talking about people being happy, healthy, stronger, faster, better, all these adjectives, but not really more human. And I think that is a very interesting thing that we're starting to see. One other thing that I want to bring up that I love about this episode is we're starting to see the bifurcation and dissolution of the identities that these children or whatever they are have been put into. We have this wonderful moment where Toodles tells Kirsch, like, I want to be called Isaac. And we see Micah brought this great point up earlier today too. We know we have two of these, hybrids. We have Toodles and we have Curly, who both seem very much more comfortable at Neverland than they had been previously. Like, they both feel actualized, they feel capable, they feel listened to, and they don't want to leave. Like they're very happy with this. Like they feel like they have jobs to do and they are, adapting to them. And that's another interesting dynamic because of course sometimes that does happen in these situations. You have some people that don't really want to leave. And of course one of them is seeming to be Wendy because she feels like she has kind of been chosen by the aliens to interpret what they're saying, which is something I think a kid would 100% do. I mean, like Henry, our younger son, like constantly talks to animals and he says those words. He's like, oh, Matilda, our dog, like wants to talk to me. So like, I'm going to let her talk to me, like he hears animals in the woods and he's like, oh, they want me to listen to them. I'm going to go listen. And then he comes back and tells us what the animals are saying. So it really like that whole thing for me, and we'll get into that element of the show tonight. But there's something in that I really love because it does remind me a lot of how a child would interpret things like that. And now Wendy, has a goal that Marcy didn't have, right? Wendy has things to live for that Marcy seemed to have lost. And we are seeing Joe Hermit confronted by that reality, right? Which is powerful. We're seeing this guy who thought his family was gone, finds this version of his sister that he now really seems to have believed is actually her. And now he's being confronted with all of these traits that she has that feel not only not like his sister, but not really human. Like the fact that she can vocalize like a xenomorph, it's pretty haunting. Like he seems very affected by that. And then she's upset that she's made him upset. And we have all these interesting sibling dynamics playing out. And I love how, even though we're still pretty early in the show, we're seeing these threads really start to unravel in terms of the identities of all these different agents of this story and how those story arcs now going into the back half of the season after next episode are going to be colliding with each other.
That's really interesting. I mean, there is so much going on in this show, in this episode, but certainly the show, there are so many threads, there are so many different questions that are being asked and pondered. But for me, what I was really noticing in episode 4 is the loss of empathy, and that Boy Cavaliers, who has no empathy, you can tell. To Andy's point she made earlier, he has a problem with parental figures. And he talks about grown-ups. Like grown-ups don't want to, he talks about grown-ups as if he isn't a grown-up. But what's insidious about his lack of empathy is he's spread it. Because he's so powerful, he has spread his lack of empathy to the people he works with. Not only is he spreading it to the people he works with, it's spreading to the hybrids as well. And they're questioning. And what I love about this is this gets into, for those of you who listen to our Blade Runner podcast, this gets into Blade Runner territory, but it's not just Blade Runner territory. It's who are we? Are we our empathy? Empathy is a big thing for me in terms of keeping it intact and knowing that, that the riddle, when is a machine not a machine? I don't know what the answer is to that riddle, but my answer would be when the machine finds empathy, it is no longer a machine. And what you see in this episode are the machines finding empathy. And you can see it in when Wendy, which I don't know whether to call her Wendy or Mercy. I don't know if Marcy's truer to herself or if Wendy is true to herself, but maybe neither are. I'm not sure. But Wendy is developing empathy for these creatures, which is interesting. Whereas all Boy Cavalier sees is dollar signs. And essentially, that's all Yutani sees as well: dollar signs, money, profit. But it's affecting these hybrids, Wendy specifically, in a very different way. But the thing about empathy here is it's really, or the lack of empathy or the loss of empathy, it's really blossoming in Arthur Sylvia and Dame Sylvia. You see them struggling with this. What are we doing? What is this? Boy Cavalier, their employment by him is stripping it away from them, and they're in a crisis of faith. And I, because this is just who I am, I feel like as a world society, we are grappling with empathy and empathy for people who are different than us, empathy for people who don't live with, who aren't legal in our. I don't want to get this into too much of a political realm, but I can't help but notice that this is the struggle of empathy is something that humanity is really at a crossroads with, and I love seeing it talked about and pondered in this series. And for me, this is what's bringing me back to Alien Earth. Is this question among many, but right now with episode 4, this question is bringing me back. So, with that said, we're going to move on to our newly our new segment called I Like Griping. And we're going to talk about some things that aren't working for us in this episode and perhaps in the season at large, but specifically to this episode. So, whoever wants to go first.
I don't really have many in this. I know I keep saying that. This one, I don't really have much to gripe about. Maybe perhaps it does. There are times when it gets a little exposition heavy again, or it feels the need to point out things that we know are obvious. Like, I know Kirsch is explaining this to one of the Lost Boys. I forget who at the moment. Was it Slightly with the see no evil, hear no evil? Like, I, I just feel like sometimes it's a little heavy-handed with the imagery and then the explanation of said imagery to characters or in between characters. That's like the one moment that probably took me out. And I liked that moment. I liked his conversation, but I feel like there's sometimes a little explanation. And then again with the five corporations, like reminding us there are five and they're going to come into play at some point. Um, I just think it could be done a little smoother. Like show, like they keep mentioning these names and they don't stick with me except for Weyland-Yutani and Prodigy because they keep talking about him, but we're not seeing anything from it. So I think that maybe could have been done a little bit better.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, we've seen this now quite a lot, and I noticed that on the second and third times through, a lot of the things that I kind of think are gripes tend to be they kind of make sense in the service of the show. So, like the one that I was kind of prepared to talk about is Wendy communicating with the creature, which is something that in our next segment we'll kind of get a little bit more into. I very much think that the alien deserves to reign supreme as this like unknowable ancient entity that I think is incredibly powerful and interesting and terrifying and elemental and unknowable. And I think that is just not the way that it's treated in this show. And I think that's very much a choice. I really think that this show is just not, although it's called Alien Earth, like it's really not about the creature. The creature is a part of it, but I mean, and Noah Hawley has signaled that basically from the very beginning. I mean, he has 5 different five animals in this thing, five alien animals in this thing, right? And it's really about the interplay of the hybrids and the corporations and these notions of empathy and humanity. And the creature just adds this element to it of otherness, and it gives us some very cool, scary moments, and some really neat set pieces. But it's kind of sidelined somewhat in this, and I feel like in episode two, I mean, at least there was like the kind of combat scene, and there was this little kind of micro hive sequence. But I mean, other than that, like really the creature is definitely knowable. Like it has boundaries. We know how it operates. We see it like a lot, like with the chest burster is very visible. I had issues, of course, with the fact that it seems to sort of bond with Wendy, because I just, I mean, we saw David do that with the Neomorph too. I feel like I don't like when they are portrayed as terrestrial animals that we know. Like, I just think that that makes it a lot less interesting and a lot less scary. That being said, I am here for the ride that Noah Hawley is taking us on, and I'm also very much here to be surprised by it, and to if I want media that shows the creature being really terrifying, I have a lot of that already. Like I really do. But I don't have any other alien media that has any of this other stuff in it, at all. So that stuff is exciting enough to me to kind of, get me over this hang up that I just still continue to have somewhat about her communicating with them. That being said, the way that it's done, I think is really interesting. I think that the way that they portray Wendy vocalizing, like I think Sydney does a really great job showing this sort of micro movements and like micro expressions in her face and her, vocal folds and things. I think it's very cool. And from a an in world perspective, it makes complete sense. Like I believe that it would be possible because of the ways in which these hybrids have been engineered and the environment that they're in. Like I totally get it. We know aliens vocalize. We have evidence of that. Not even just in the expanded universe, which we will get to, but in films as well. Like we know that they communicate. That's not like a mystery. Um, but in terms of films, we haven't had very direct one-to-one communication before with humans, and that's just something that it's a taste thing and it's a preference thing, but it is something worth noting for me.
I would definitely echo what you said, Patrick. I think between episodes 1 and 3, the creature, the alien itself, the xenomorph, is visceral and wicked and awesome. I think it suffers from inconsistency of the way they shot it. Sometimes it looks fantastic, other times it just looks like this cheap puppet. And I don't understand, and I've said this before, but I don't understand why they can't be consistent with it. I don't understand why they can't, in every scene, it's covered in some type of liquid so it looks alive, but then they cut to something else, and then uh, sometimes the suit looks awkward. It looks like a leotard stretched over. And I've seen images of the suit from behind the scenes, and the guy in the suit, and I'm just like, what are they? They don't seem to understand this thing from shot to shot. But it's just one of those things, and I can see past this because I think so many other things are working. What doesn't really work for me is when the chest burster came out of the lung and Wendy's all petting it. They're talking about remystifying this creature. They are not remystifying it. They're completely demystifying it. And they're making it this little pet. Like, and to me, like, I love this thing. I probably, even though Patrick has more toys than I do, I love this creature as much as he does. This thing is wicked and it's scary. And to see it be treated like a pet or be treated, and I don't like that Wendy can talk to it. It's very Alien Resurrection in the way where there's a scene in Resurrection where Ripley's like, I can hear them. It's the queen. She's in pain. I just was like, we've been down this road before. This is cheesy. This is really cheesy. This is the best that you could come up with. It's whatever, though. The characters are good enough, and Patrick and I have been having this conversation today. For me, the characters are really strong in this show, the strongest that we've seen since the original trilogy, and that's what I'm here for. But but they are encumbered by some strange decisions, strange creative decisions. And I hope by season 2 they can really perfect it. I hope by season 2 that they can actually remystify the alien. I think it needs to be. I think it needs to be that stillness that you were talking about, Patrick, of the sheep. That's the kind of stillness I want out of. I mean, I love the aggressiveness of the XX-121 it running down the halls. I love that. But if you think about Aliens and Alien 3, that creature was static a lot of times, just sitting. just wigging. Or when Ripley's in the cockpit or in the Narcissist at the end of Alien, it's just laying there kind of asleep. We don't really know what it's doing. I love that stillness. And I think on a TV budget, even though they've had a really big budget, I think that they need to really rethink how they approach this thing because it's not doing it any favors. So I'll leave it there for now.
And it could even just not show it as much. Like I feel like a lot of this would have been solved by them just not having to show the creature like every single episode. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that being said, for another time, we have to get to our. I think is our last thing, right? Yeah, the lore and world building, which I've been teasing every single time I've spoken this entire night. But let's take a second and go through a couple of discussions happening. I want to do a quick. I'm not going to spoil anything, but and I'm not even going to say who did. But in the chat last week, a prediction was made. I'm not going to say which one that I thought was ridiculous, and it's kind of true later in the season. So I'm going to say we have some very astute people in the YouTube live chat right now. So if you want to join them and you're listening to the after show of this the next day when we upload the audio, consider joining for the live stream because the conversations are super, super cool. And there's a lot of really neat theories happening in there, and I'm not going to tell you which one. Matt Goldsworthy brings up something that has bothered me a little bit too, which is that so Babu, who also was just on our show again, by the way, and you're going to be hearing from him very soon, in a recent interview said that Morrow's first name reveal was a big deal. And we do find it out in this episode, and it's Kumi, which is a fantastic name. It's a beautiful name, and it's common to a few different cultures. But in terms of Ghanaian culture, it usually implies like strength and solidity. But it doesn't seem like it's a super, in world lore necessary name. So I'm really curious about that. And I should have asked Babu when he was on the other day. But good news is he's coming back yet again, so we can ask him then about that. Um, Also, let me see if there's anything else in here to get to super quick. I'll tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and move into lore and I'll let you guys choose comments because I keep reading them and you guys can choose ones you want. And while you're doing that, I want to talk about communicating with people. This is something that has a ton of precedent in the expanded universe. It's something that I have always thought was super dumb. I'm going to be totally honest with it. The one that's probably most in people's minds is Alien Earth War, which is very inconsistent, has some cool scenes in it. But that one, the creatures communicate with humans via nightmares, and they kind of show people nightmare images. Also in Nightmare Asylum, fittingly named, we have a queen who can communicate using the language of dreams with, I think, Newt, actually, in that one. And then even as recently as Sea of Sorrows, the novel that came out, I guess not that recently, it's probably 10 years ago now. We have the creatures being able to communicate via like a human telepath. This is all over the place. This is something that has been in the expanded universe for a long time. What's happening with Wendy is materially different from that, and I'll get to that in a second. But I do want to point out, though, also to something else that I was saying earlier. In Aliens, right, we have the Queen issuing phonetic vocal commands to her warrior drones, and they are responding to it, and they're hissing and communicating, communicating with each other. So the creature has never been silent. It's never been just this kind of wailing thing that doesn't mean anything. There's always been some degree of like direction to what it says, right? In the expanded universe treatments, when this has happened, it also is in one of the early script treatments for Alien 3, now that I'm thinking of it. It's almost always through this kind of dream language, which makes no fucking sense. I think it's a really cool it's a really cool idea. Like it's interesting, but like I don't know. I don't get it. What's happening with Wendy is because of her auditory capabilities, she's able to hear what they're emitting. And because they are emitting sounds and she is this walking super processor, she's able to create some degree of inference of what they might be saying based on patterns that they're emitting. So it's not like they are sending her telepathic signals and she's like, doing that. It's nothing to do with that. The first time I saw this episode and the previous episode, I was like, oh, no, 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 don't tell me we're getting fucking Alien Earth War in here. It's like, don't do this to me again. And that's not what this is. This is purely just computing, making sense out of noises and using that to be able to communicate with this previously, non-communicative species with humans. Kind of an interesting treatment. I agree with Jamie that it demystifies them too much, and it's not something that I would have ever done. But I do think it's worth, a lot of people in the chat and in our green room and elsewhere, are bringing up that this is like kind of a psychic link or something. And I really want to like drive home that it's really not. I think Wendy kind of interprets it like that because she's a 12-year-old girl, and I think she kind of sees that in it. But I think really what it is it's just pattern recognition. And I do like that it seems, especially as of episode 3 or 4 rather, that Wendy is not entirely sure of, what they're actually saying, but she's starting to get some sense of it. And she's really driven to do so by this threat that Boy Cavalier makes, which is a pretty big deal, that he's going to, Hermit will be excommunicated if she can't figure it out. And one would have to imagine killed, because Boy Cavalier takes no prisoners. What do you guys think about all that?
I agree with you that initially, or just currently, I don't read it as psychic either. I think it's purely mechanical. It's a function of her being a synth. But I think she feels a certain power from that, and a certain, even though I think in the episode at one point she says, "I'm not special," right? Because they're questioning, well, why do you get your brother? And why do you have this? But I do think she thinks she's special because she said, I'm the first one, right? And it's sort of that like older sibling sort of vibe, like, well, I came first and I'm older. Um, and she wasn't, right? She was the younger sister in her human form. So she has this viewpoint now of, well, now I'm the older sister, so I have this sort of power. Um, and like you were saying, like with your son, it's almost like a secret language. Like no one else is capable of doing it. And so it's like her secret, even though they're hearing her and they're hearing her replicate these sounds. You can see, and I love the way she's portraying this. There's like a glint, there's like a hint of in her eye of just like pride almost. And I agree with you. I totally bought that the way she was moving her mouth, that she was making those sounds. Because I was watching it. I was like, how are they recreating this? Like, what would the way she like they zoom in on her lips and her throat? It actually looks like her throat could be saying or making those sounds. So I didn't take it as sort of telepathic, although I do agree there are shades of resurrection, but I said that from episode 1. Remember, I was like, I feel like this is what resurrection wanted to be, this sort of out there premise, but done in a way that's a little bit more grounded in reality. I think it's more serious, even though there are fantastical elements that a lot of people have been rolling their eyes about. Um, like you said, Jamie, I think the characters are strong enough to that I'm latched onto them more so than I am my problems with the Xeno. And I have to say, the Teocellus is the star for me in terms of the creature. That scene, I, it might be one of my favorite creature moments in all of Alien. Not my favorite, but one of them. From the fear of the sheep, the backing away, which I loved in the preview, by the way. That was one of my favorite moments that we saw. I was like, oh, I know this one's going to be good. When you see fear in an animal, that's when I get scared. Because I'm like, they know, they always know. And the way that thing was just, burrowed into the socket, the way it plopped out, I thought it was well done. It was gross, but it was intriguing. And then once it was fully implanted in and you could see what it was seeing, it was calm, like you said, but it was zeroing in and it just like slight movements. And then it would reframe the characters and it would center them and it would like really zoom in. And you could see through its perspective, its curiosity. Like it really sold the curiosity of that creature. I loved that. I think that was my favorite moment of the whole episode. So, what I fear the show is maybe lacking in certain parts of the Xeno, I think it's making up for in the Teocellus. It's my favorite thing. I love it.
It is really awesome. I wanted to make a special note on that moment that Wendy has with Boy Cavalier, where he's talking to her and he says something like, you're special. She goes, no, I'm not special. And do you notice she puts a smile on her face and talks to him she makes herself smaller to please him, which is what everyone is doing. She's learning. She's learning what she has to do to survive him or to get along with him. And I just wanted to make sure that that moment does not go unnoticed because it it resonates with me of these things that we do to maybe if we're interacting with toxic people, these things that we do to sort of ensure our own safety. And the strange thing about this is that Wendy could have broken Boy
Mhm.
Cavalier's neck like that. She doesn't understand. Well, maybe she will eventually. They don't understand that they have way more power than he will ever. That they are the gods in the room, but he's the one acting like the god. At any rate, I do love the world building. I love the TSLS. I think it's wonderful. I want a model of it on my desk right now, as I know Patrick does too.
And I should say Mario in the chat is looking at making one. So
Oh,
Mario, if you want
I know.
My daughter is gonna crochet me one.
Oh, awesome.
Yes,
Awesome.
I'm
But yeah,
excited.
I love it. I love that the world building that they're doing. I do wish that the other creatures, the fly thing and the tick thing, I wish they were a little more creative. I wish a little as much thought went into them. But at the same time, I can't judge that. We don't know what they do. We don't know where they go. We don't know what their life cycle is. We don't know what happens. The tick, we really don't know what happens. Because all we've seen this so far is from the first episode where they um get the guy's throat and they swell up with blood, and that's it. That's the last we see of it. So that should be interesting as well. But I really love the culture they're building around the TSLS. That thing is frightening as fuck. This little cute looking thing. And you do not, it's got eyes, but it's not the window to its soul because those eyes are a decoy in some way. But it's thinking. At least we think it's thinking. It's fascinating. They've done an amazing job with
Mhm.
this thing. They've really done their homework. They've made it scary. And again, I think they should approach the XX121, the xenomorph, the same way. I think it'll be just as scary. But yeah, it's fantastic.
yeah, it's almost more frustrating because they did such a great job with this new creature that I'm like, why didn't I mean, they clearly put so much work into getting the Xeno XS121. But why doesn't it have the same gravitas? I mean, the Acellus is like the star of this whole fucking thing, other than like the actual actors in it. I mean, the Acellus, like everybody, look at our chat, look at every single, piece of art people are making. They love this thing. And I think it's because it really is just tapping into something. My kids are obsessed with it. But also, I thought they were going to hate this episode because of the sheep thing. We had a conversation about it beforehand. I told them exactly what was going to happen. They both decided that they wanted to watch it. And this is their favorite episode of the show. They were like totally in, and they like love this creature. And I really think, we can kind of stop with the timers for a second because we're kind of at the end. We just free for all for a couple of minutes here with the people in the chat. I think part of why the SLS is so cool is because it is, and I'm going to call it the image, which is what it's actually supposed to be called, is because it does something amazing that I haven't really seen since the modern Planet of the Apes films, where you get a CG creature that actually transmits a sense of being humanly intelligent. There's something like with Caesar, I feel like, due to Andy Serkis's performance and the way they captured it, like I really got a sense that he really was genuinely an intelligent being, even though he was just pixels. The Astellas like really, really feels like it's very, very smart. And you will see more examples of this as the show goes on. I think it is so observant. I think that's what it is. It is, to Andy's point, it is constantly reassessing. It is finding ways out of situations that it's in. And it's so small and defenseless on its own. I mean, it gets trapped under a freaking lunch tray. You know what I mean? It's just this little tiny thing. But if it gets the right angle on you and if it gets a chance to attack, you are so fucked and you can't do anything about it. Like you are stuck. And Micah brought up a great point, which I'm going to take the wind out of her sails on now. So when she says it again, when she's on our roundtable, make sure she gets credit for it. But she points out that the Acellus always goes into the left eye of everything that it attacks, which
I
is of
noticed
course where
too.
logic and reasoning comes from. And you even see that when it is homing in on somebody, it homes in immediately to their left eye. It looks right to the left eye. And that is one of those little character traits that is just like it's really smart, like to think about that and to put the effort into it. I really think the image is a genuinely iconic new monster in cinema. And I am really here for it. And I love that we get another iconic creature in this franchise, which is full of the most iconic ones ever made. I also want to just do a quick shout out, and this was also brought up in the YouTube chat about the doll's head in the beginning of the episode, how it opens with, obviously shades of, Newt's beloved doll, floating on the beach and kind of gets pulled into the ocean. And in my kind of like head canon, I think that was just sort of like detritus that was floating in the sea, like a piece of plastic waste or something from somewhere that washed up for a moment on this shore. And it kind of brings to mind not only aliens, but I think it brings to mind sort of what these hybrids are, which is these like empty vessels. They're just these like bodies that are then imbued with something that may or may not be human. And that is like, again, when things in the show upset me a little bit, I just go back to that and I'm so on board again. Like, I mean, I love just to go back to a moment, something I was saying earlier. I love how we're seeing all these identities break down, and I think that's something that I would have assumed would have happened at the end of the season. Like I thought that it would take all the way to the end for them to start being like, wait a minute, like what if we aren't really what we think we are? I love that they're already gradually, kind of one by one, reaching this point where they're like, wait, this doesn't make sense. Like why? I didn't really ask for this, and Arthur, who a special shout out to David Riesdahl, who was on. We had a wonderful call with him last week. Got a lot of good stuff. We are probably going to save his after show for later in the season because he does some stuff later on that we want to save. But stay tuned because he will be on an episode of Unearthed in the audio version. He's becoming one of my favorite character actors out there. I really think he has so much humanity in his performance as Arthur, and I think in those little moments with Dame Sylvia when they're outside the facility, you just see this like really this like depth of humanity in him, this wellspring of like empathy and of seeing these hybrids as kids, as like the kids that they could never have because of his low sperm count, right? Like I think he really is seeing them as like his actual children, and he's becoming gradually more horrified at what they're willing to do to these kids, up to the point of doing some sort of an invasive treatment to nibs to solve the problem. I think that's really really interesting.
Yeah.
What's also, oh, go ahead, Andy.
I was gonna just say that a lot of the villains, quote unquote, are using people's humanity against them. Like that's the weapon they're using, right? To defeat or to beat or to, like you were saying, like diminish these characters. It's always the threat of harm to a loved one. It's, Mara brings up the question of loyalty and friendship. And he's like, but I thought we were friends, right? And in the same breath, slightly he's talking about not wanting to hurt his friends, right? But Mara's sort of ignoring that and playing on, yeah, but you're my friend. And it's sinister because as children you're still learning right and wrong, and you're you know kids don't know the nuance of, they see everything as black and white. And what do you do when you are hurting the enemy of an enemy or stealing something that was stolen back, right? That whole question. So I love how he's playing on their innocence. And I mean, I don't love it, but it's serving the story so well because it's just as sinister as the Teocellus looking at you, right? He's looking deep within them and calling into question their empathy, their loyalty, their innate love of their family. Like this whole episode, family is a weakness, right? Everyone's poo-pooing your familial ties and what connects you back to what you were. And they're sort of the ones that are, like you said, that are enjoying being there and want to stay. They're focused on the knowledge, the, learning. He talks about, oh, I can read a book in an instant and gain this knowledge. And those are all wonderful goals, but at what cost, right? And so I love that theme. And I'm curious to see what it is. And Morrow is just horrible in this, but I love what's happening because I felt it as a mother. I felt it from her end, Slightly's, mother. The you will do anything. You are so desperate. You will do anything to get one more moment with your child, right? Even though logically, who's this guy? She can't hear him, right? He can hear her. Slightly can hear his mother, but she can't hear her son. But she believes, she wants to. And so her love is being weaponized against her and putting her in a vulnerable spot. I think it's a wonderful dynamic they're showing.
And at the end of the day, the question remains, what are these hybrids? Are they actually imbued with human consciousness? What if that answer is no? So what are they? What are they? What I mean, and we might feel like, oh, they're kids. Are they kids? Can they be, like, for instance, if someone were to go to our social media and download into a narrative everything we've ever posted over the however many years that we've have been alive that we've been posting, and they make a concoction of our personalities, and they also include the last moments of their memories, and they put them into this thing who sounds like, let's just use me, sounds like Jamie, talks like Jamie, but is it really me? Is it really me? Why do we have empathy for them? Should we have empathy for them? I, I don't know. I love these questions. This is why I love science fiction, because I don't know the answer to these questions, but I know our pondering those answers make us more human. Our pondering those answers make us open to um, things and ideas that are different than us, things and ideas and people who believe differently than us, who love differently than us, who worship differently than we do, who live in different continents, who people who have struggled differently than we do. That's what science fiction does. It opens us up to the possibility. And what I love about Alien Earth, even if everything else failed, which it isn't, but even if it did, it's opening the conversation to what does it mean to be human? But more than that, what is an alien? Who is who is the biggest threat in this show? It's not the xenomorph. It's not the Teocellus. It's Boy Cavalier. He's the alien in the much like Ash was the alien in one of the threats in Alien. Boy Cavalier is that role. Um, so there's so much more that I want to say, but I know
I know.
Yeah, we
we're
got to
going to
save
be
it. I know.
we're recording another roundtable tomorrow night that will be released on Friday. So stay tuned.
Yeah, and just as we wrap, a couple quick things in the chat. Julian D'Souza brings up a great point that maybe when Boy Cavalier does have that conversation someday with someone smarter than him, he might not like what he sees. And I agree, just to Jamie's point, I think Boy Cavalier is like he's a villain for the fucking ages. I mean, I mean, I think, like one of the great villains in modern, alien history in this guy. I think he's so interesting, and he's a character that could be so rote and one dimensional, and he's just not. And I love that. And I love that Sam Blanken is coming on our show very soon to talk about his character. And I can't wait to see where he goes this season and maybe even beyond. Who knows? I think he's an amazing, amazing guy. And yeah, I mean, to my point earlier, Jamie and I were kind of going back and forth about this. I feel like no matter how you feel about certain thematic things or certain tonal things or whatever, I think we can all agree on, to Jamie's point, the characters being incredibly good, but also that the walls have been blown the fuck out for alien storytelling. Like, we have spent this entire franchise stuck in a hallway with an alien at the end
Mhm.
of it. We have always been in that same hallway, and it's been scary, but when you stay in one room for long enough, you start kind of knowing where stuff is. You can find the light switch, right? Like, what is so cool about Alien Earth is like there is no hallway at all, and like we are just in this total new situation where there's all these new themes and characters and ideas and technologies and timelines and all these really interesting new things, and each one of those things is a seed that some other storyteller can go run with now, or that Noah Hawley himself, if he gets to continue this, can go take in a very different direction. To Andy's point, we haven't seen Lynch dynamic or Threshold at all. I mean, one would have to imagine there's a lot of cool storytelling that can happen with that. I mean, there is so much to say and to see now. And I think that Alien will ultimately be so much better for it, because that means that when we do get something like another Alien Romulus, which is putting us back in that hallway again in a really fun and well made way, it's going to feel comforting. It's going to feel like coming back home again. It's going to feel exciting. It's going to feel like, oh, this is classic Alien. And now I'm ready to like see what else is out there again, and we're finally getting that really for the first time. And to Andy's point, lastly, before we wrap, Alien Resurrection tried to do that. I don't think it even was, I think it kind of accidentally tried to do that. But Alien Earth is like actually doing it and sticking the landing in terms of making a narrative that makes sense and that is buttressed by characters that are, I mean, almost to a person, fantastic. There's some unevenness in some places. Whatever. The season has a lot more to go. We'll be talking about it. But I think that the principal characters in this, to a person, are fantastic. I think Morrow is one of the great characters in the history of Alien. Period. And I think the fact that not only do we have one of those in the show, we have like seven. I mean, how lucky are we? This is so, so cool. So much more to talk about.
Indeed.
Agreed.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for watching / listening, everyone. And we will be back next week to talk about episode 5.
Thank you.
Bye.